Welcome to the deep dive. So, you've brought us a really fascinating stack of source material today.
Yes, it's quite a collection. Sketches, interviews, prominent Americans from what, late 19th, early 20th century?
Exactly. Artists, inventors, business leaders, politicians, writers, performers. I mean, it's a really broad spectrum.
It really is. It's almost like stepping back in time, isn't it? To
Mhm.
ask these people, directly
Yeah.
what drove them, how they saw opportunity, what success even meant back then.
Yeah.
These sources, they offer a pretty unique snapshot of achievement from that whole era.
Okay, so our mission for this deep dive, getting into your sources here, is really to pull out the most important nuggets. Insights about success, opportunity, the paths these different folks took.
Right. Getting to the core ideas from this specific collection you've shared.
Hmm.
Think of it as your guide to understanding some fundamental perspectives on striving, on achievement, straight from the people who were right in the middle of it, during a period of, well, huge change in America.
Okay, let's dive right in then. Looking through these sources, there's this really strong feeling right at the start, isn't there? This idea of America back then as just overflowing with opportunity.
Yes. It's pretty hard to miss. A lot of these interviews, they really reflect this deep belief that America was just, I don't know, uniquely fertile ground for ambitious people.
Timberline ground, yeah.
And you find these phrases celebrating how easily able and energetic young men and women can so readily rise here, supposedly unmatched anywhere else.
That phrase, rise with most astonishing rapidity, it paints such an optimistic picture, right? Like, if you had the drive, the path was just wide open.
But what's fascinating is that your sources, they aren't completely uniform on this.
Yeah.
Like tucked away in there, you find Governor Pingree,
Pingree, right.
and he's actually expressing some concern, for his today relative to when these sources were put together, that maybe opportunities were, well, less abundant for young men.
Less, really, at that time.
Yeah, he sounds almost, I don't know, wistful, kind of lamenting there isn't anything for them to do.
Wow. That is a striking contrast. So, land of boundless opportunity on one hand,
Hmm.
and then this feeling of stagnation almost for the youth on the other. What does that tension right there, the collection you brought, tell us about how opportunity was seen, or maybe even how we think about it now?
Well, it suggests, I think, that perceptions of opportunity are pretty complex, maybe depend quite a bit on your perspective.
Where you're standing, yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Your industry, your circumstances.
Yeah.
It highlights that even in times we label as like super opportunistic, there were people then worried about access, worried about the future for the next generation.
Mm.
It sort of forces us to look beyond the big, broad labels
Yeah.
and see the nuances, which is, I think, a great insight from these sources right off the bat.
It really does complicate that simple story.
Huh.
Okay, so moving from that landscape of opportunity, what about the starting line? A theme that just jumps out again and again across these sketches is how many of these successful people started with basically nothing.
Oh, absolutely. This beginning at the bottom idea. It's a powerful, recurring thing in your sources. It's presented not just as like a common backstory, but as something really integral to their narrative.
Yeah, think about it. Andrew Carnegie starts as a telegrapher, a messenger boy.
Right. And Colonel Clowry, an unpaid telegraph operator, had to support himself with odd jobs, cooking his own meals. Imagine that.
Incredible. And then you've got Marshall Field and Marshall Wilder,
Yeah.
described just as poor farmer boys.
John Wanamaker starting out making, what, $1.50 a week?
Yeah, and delivering his first big order with a wheelbarrow. Famously investing like 38 bucks in an ad that changed everything for him.
It's amazing. Russell Sage, too. From grocery clerk to low-wage office boy before he became this titan of finance.
And Alexander Johnston Cassatt, who, okay, maybe he could have pulled some strings, but he chose to start as a rodman on the railroad.
Deliberately.
Yeah, explicitly to get the knowledge of the primary details of the business.
Yep.
Right from the ground up.
It's a pattern. Johnny Rockefeller, starting as a poorly paid clerk. F.W. Woolworth, launching that famous 5-cent counter with just $50 worth of goods, had to borrow $325 for his first store.
And it wasn't just business, right? You mentioned Champ Clark working all sorts of jobs to pay for his education.
Yep. Joseph Collier, apprenticed as a blacksmith. Sir Henry M. Stanley, starting life as an unknown boy.
Yeah.
Walter Wellman, establishing a weekly newspaper when he was only 14.
It feels like more than just, a rags to riches trope. The way the sources frame it, the struggle,
Right.
it wasn't just something they overcame. It actually built character, practical knowledge.
Exactly. It's almost presented as an advantage. It directly challenges that idea that you need, privilege or some big head start.
Mm.
The sources seem to argue that the grit, the resourcefulness, the sort of firsthand understanding you get by starting from scratch, those were fundamental ingredients in their later success. That feels like a really key nugget from this collection.
So if starting low was common, what kind of person actually managed to rise? Because the sources, they spend a lot of time detailing the personal qualities, the habits they saw as just essential.
Oh, they certainly do. And if you synthesize those points, a few core things really come to the forefront again and again. The most prominent, maybe not surprising, is just relentless effort.
Hard work.
Hard work, industry, perseverance. These seem absolutely non-negotiable in these accounts.
That quote from Joseph Collier stands out, doesn't it? Genius is devotion and application. It's not about some innate gift, it's about the grind.
Right. And Edison, famous for his long hours, he just states it so matter-of-factly, you do something all day long, don't you?
Huh. Yeah. Marshall Field, even while saying people should have reasonable hours, apparently worked day and night himself when things got tough.
And it wasn't just business. You see it in the arts, too. Adelina Patti, the singer, maintained persistent attention to duty in art, overcoming, real threats to her voice.
Mm-hmm.
And the artist Charles Dana Gibson, his advice is just pure action.
Mm.
Draw all the time. Look all the time for something to draw. It's about constant engagement, constant practice. Sir Thomas Shaughnessy, known as a hard student, believes students should love to labor.
Sir Wilfrid Laurier, too, emphasizing hard work and perseverance, and Stanley saying any obstacle could be destroyed by enthusiasm and persistency.
So it's not just putting in hours, is it? It's the focus, the devotion during those hours.
Yeah. What else did these sources really hammer home as crucial?
Well, inseparable from effort, really, is this idea of integrity, truth, honesty. Russell Sage apparently just dismissed dishonesty as absurd.
Absurd to think it pays off.
Exactly. And Samuel M. Jones, drawing on his business experience, believed real success required force of character enough to hold to these convictions against the many wrongful pressures, especially in politics, he felt.
Philip D. Armour, he said truth was the most essential trait. That capital, money, ultimately follows truth.
Yeah, and Timothy Eaton had that strict rule of allowing absolutely no misrepresentation. He felt truth was just vital for any permanent success, in stores or, well, in life generally.
And they highlight Governor Folk refusing bribes in St. Louis as like a real-world example of this principle in action.
Right, so it seems they saw integrity not just as, a nice moral thing, but as a practical necessity for lasting achievement.
Makes sense. What else?
Building on that, you definitely see the importance of foresight, good judgment.
Ah, yeah. Theodore Roosevelt called foresight a most valuable thing to have, right? For seizing opportunities.
Mm-hmm. Marshall Field was known for his good judgment, and Philip D. Armour again, that dramatic foresight, predicting the 1893 panic, telling his men to borrow heavily beforehand, presented as a key strategic move based on seeing what was coming.
That foresight. It sounds a bit like another quality mention. Self-reliance, independence.
Yes. Roosevelt learned it out on the frontier, didn't he? The capacity to do for himself, self-reliance and personal courage.
And Maud Powell, the violinist, described with pluck, independence, perseverance as a, quote, typical American girl. It's about seeing for yourself, acting decisively.
Definitely. And then finally, there's this thread weaving through so many of them, the emphasis on learning, reading, self-improvement.
Right. Edison's attempt as a kid to read the entire free library at Detroit. What an image. That hunger for knowledge.
It really is. John Burroughs focused on study to achieve high thinking. Russell Sage saw reading books as a clear advantage.
It's interesting, though. You see differing views on, like, formal education in your sources, don't you?
Yeah, that's true. Some, like Field and Gompers, weren't convinced college was strictly necessary.
Right.
But then others, Platt, Sherman, Roosevelt, Dill, they saw it as definitely profitable or a big advantage for intellectual discipline, social connections, mental stimulus, practicality, lots of reasons.
So it seems the learning was the crucial part, but the path to get it could vary quite a bit.
Exactly. And remember Cassatt. Choosing to start as a rodman, he did it specifically for the sake of the knowledge of the primary details.
Practical learning again.
And Joseph Collier had that ravenous appetite for books as a boy. The sources often seem to pair book learning with strong and close observation of life.
Combining theory and practice.
Yeah. Even the artist Charles Dana Gibson emphasized teaching yourself by drawing things the way it looks to you. personal observation, and skill building.
Wow. It's a pretty powerful list of qualities, isn't it? Hard work, integrity, foresight, self-reliance, that hunger for learning.
As you think about this list from the sources you provided, which ones kind of jump out at you as maybe still relevant today?
It's striking, really, how foundational many of them still feel. Even if the world, landscape of opportunity looks pretty different now, they suggest this core toolkit, maybe, of character and effort. Yeah. Now, okay, many of these people clearly achieved huge financial success. But your sources make a really important point here, don't they? They challenge the idea that making money is the only form of success, or even the highest form.
This is such a critical nugget, I think, from this collection. You have figures like Dolliver, Gonzalez, Depew, Parent, all basically voicing this idea that money making is the cheapest kind of success. It doesn't indicate the highest development.
That's a direct pushback, isn't it? Against just a purely material definition.
Totally. And they offered alternatives rooted more in contribution and character. Samuel M. Jones defines success as usefulness to others as well as to myself.
Usefulness to others. That idea seems to echo through quite a few accounts.
Oh, yeah. Phil D. Armour, Sir William Van Horn talks about usefulness to society. Helen Miller Gould, Nathan Strauss, Clara Barton leading disaster relief efforts.
Louis Klopsch with international charities, Francis Edward Clark, Ada Rehan Allen, and her private charities.
Yeah.
It's a recurring theme.
Definitely. And John Burroughs sought high thinking, not money making. John C. M. Depew. He defines success not just by the end result, but by the process itself. Doing well what comes to his hand and who works to improve himself. He said, the man with the ideal struggling to carry it out is the successful man.
The struggle itself, again, and for Samuel M. Jones, it was also about having that force of character enough to hold to these convictions.
Even the introduction to the sources you brought defines success more broadly, achieving something beyond the ordinary in life.
Right. And for others in the collection, especially artists, performers, success seems to mean reputation, popularity, the ability to actually move people through their work.
Yes. Figures like Remington, Davenport, Gibson, Opper.
Okay.
Sculptors like Ruckstuhl and Schrady, Sousa, Patrick, Jefferson, Barrymore. Their impact was measured differently.
Think about F. Wellington Ruckstuhl, giving up a huge salary, $5,000 a year back then.
Which was massive.
Because he felt he'd found my life's work as a sculptor, even knowing it meant struggling through poverty.
Or Henry Merwin Schrady, abandoning law for art because he sort of found himself during his leisure time, turning a hobby into his whole career. These folks weren't chasing the money, were they? They were following something else.
Passion, maybe.
Purpose. Yeah, something like that. And success could also mean just overcoming incredible challenges, like Marshall Wilder becoming an entertainer despite physical limitations. Helen Keller achieving so much as a scholar and activist against huge sensory barriers. Clara Barton leading global humanitarian efforts.
And Joseph Jefferson, achieving this unparalleled popularity for playing one single role, Rip Van Winkle, more times than any other actor ever. That's such a unique kind of success, isn't it? Dedicated mastery.
It really is.
These examples, they really broaden that definition way beyond just the bank balance. Looking at your sources here, how do these different ways of thinking about success resonate with your own understanding? Is it about impact, creativity, integrity, resilience, mastery, or something else entirely?
It seems this collection really argues that understanding success requires looking at the whole person, their contribution, their character, not just their financial standing.
Yeah. Speaking of the whole person, what makes these individuals unique? Your sources are just sprinkled with these really memorable anecdotes, personal quirks, things that add color and bring them to life, beyond just the lists of qualities.
Oh, they really do. They show the human side, don't they? Like Thomas Edison having this peculiar dislike for looking at his own successful inventions once they were done.
The telephone, the light bulb.
Yeah. Apparently he hated them after they were finished, which is just strange, right?
Yeah.
For maybe the greatest inventor of the age.
It's bizarre. Or Andrew Carnegie making that pivotal early investment in sleeping cars just because of something he noticed while traveling.
Opportunity knocking because he was paying attention. Simple as that sometimes.
And Russell Sage's story, his detailed account of starting as a grocery clerk, his confidence that country boys could make it big in the city, feels very specific, very personal to him.
It does. Or the story of H. Freeland, getting that really cryptic telegram that led him to taking charge of a railroad switch out in some dreary marsh. Sounds almost like a riddle, doesn't it? That unexpected fork in the road.
It does. And Theodore Roosevelt's wrestling match with Jay Gould back in school, where Gould was apparently just focused on winning no matter the rules. A little glimpse of that competitive drive, maybe, from a young age.
Ah, maybe so.
Eh,
And Marshall Wilder's journey.
yeah.
You mentioned him overcoming limitations. The story of him weeping in Bryant Park because he couldn't sell anything as a peddler,
Oh, wow.
and then later becoming the entertainer of princes, that really captures that whole bottom to top thing with a very specific, poignant low point.
It really does. What about John Philip Sousa paying $175 for a special train for his band?
Yeah, just because he disagreed with some railway official's narrow policy. A mix of principle and maybe a bit of showmanship there.
Could be. And Helen Keller. Finding out about her infectious merriment, her love for practical jokes. It's delightful. And that sharp wit, asking the interviewer if he meant soul of an ancient Greek or young Greek.
It totally breaks that sort of solemn image people might have, doesn't it?
Complete.
And Sir William Van Horn, the railroad builder, having this passion for painting pictures as recreation, a surprising creative side to balance out the huge logistical work.
Then there's Philip D. Armour's dramatic moment before the 1893 panic, telling his guys in Chicago to borrow all you need on my credit, just sheer high-stakes confidence based on his judgment.
Yeah, and those rear admirals, Chester and Pullen, being praised for seamanship with that very specific phrase, pumps free, compass right, everything shipshape.
It paints such a clear picture of competence, doesn't it? Very technical.
It does. And how about Rear Admiral Sigsbee, crediting his success largely to his mother and then advising people to select a good mother to improve the next generation,
Aha. Definitely unconventional advice.
to say the least. And Richard F. Outcault, creator of famous comics like The Yellow Kid, describing his simple life despite his fame. Flowers, garden, dog, cat, music, books, pipe, even single tax theories. A real picture of staying grounded, having specific interests outside the limelight.
These stories, these little glimpses, they really bring the sources alive, don't they? And show the sheer variety of people and paths within your collection.
Absolutely. They stop these figures from just being abstract examples and turn them back into, well, real people with their own quirks and defining moments.
So, okay, wrapping up this deep dive into the fascinating sources you've brought us, we've really covered a lot of ground.
We really have. We've seen those complex views on opportunity, the powerful narrative starting from, well, humble beginnings, and the strong emphasis the sources place on those foundational qualities: hard work, integrity, foresight, learning.
And maybe most interestingly, we explored how this collection really challenges that narrow, just money-focused idea of success, highlighting the importance of contribution, character, artistic mastery, just finding your own unique path.
Yeah, this deep dive into your sources, it really reinforces that there wasn't one single rigid formula was there. But you definitely see common threads: effort, integrity, having a clear purpose, and often that willingness to define success on their own terms, sometimes in pretty unconventional ways, as those stories showed.
It's been a really insightful look at what drove some of America's leading figures during that era, at least as presented in the material you shared. So thank you for bringing these sources for this deep dive.
Oh, it was a pleasure exploring them with you. They certainly offer a lot to think about.
And that brings us, I guess, to our final thought for you, the listener. Having brought these specific sources and having gone on this deep dive with us today, seeing the contrasting views on opportunity, the focus on humble starts, those demanding qualities, the really varied definitions of success, and all those very human anecdotes. What does success truly mean to you? And how might the lessons, the perspectives from these varied lives found right here in the collection you curated, how might they inform or maybe even challenge your own path forward?
Perhaps it's about, finding the elements in these stories that really resonate most deeply with you, and then thinking about how to apply them to build a life that you consider successful, well-lived, using these historical perspectives as a kind of unique map, maybe.
Definitely something to mull over as you reflect on the insights from your deep dive. Thanks for joining us.